My brother has this fantastic story where he became bartender when he was in his mid 20s, which is a great job when you're in your mid 20s, and not such a bad job when you're in your late 20s either. And then he's starting to push 40 and he's like, what am I going to do with my life? And so he goes back to school at 40 years old. I'm going to school. He's going to get his master's in rhetoric, which was one of the great subjects of classical education that they don't really teach too much anymore. He got his master's, he graduated with honors, he had that cool little extra tassel on his cap, very, very proud of himself. And with rhetoric, you know what you end up doing? You end up teaching college. That's what you end up doing, right? And so he became a professor. And I was so excited. How, Mark, his name is Mark, are they training you to teach? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, what are they doing to make sure that you're a great teacher in college? And he said, well, I have my master's. And what's interesting is teaching is such an incredible skill, isn't it? And there's so little intention and training and study put into it. And so that's what we're doing today. Today, we've got 30 minutes of stellar teaching, and teaching is hard enough already. And now we're all teaching remotely, right? That gets even weirder. My name's David Lieberman. I'm one of the founders of Gravity Learning. At Gravity, what we do is we focus on research. So we're not trying to follow trends or what somebody writes in a blog, which of course could be very interesting. We want something real. Like, what did the jury journal research study say? We take that and turn that into real doable skills, things that are real world, that are step by step by step by step. Then we practice the heck out of them to make sure that they change lives. We're here to change lives. Now, the webinar that we're doing today is a little bit different than our standard workshops. Our standard workshops are super hands-on. It's more of a conversation. It's more of a practice session. It follows the real way that we learn in real life, which we'll reveal today. Right. So if you get the opportunity to book a workshop with us for your organization, then you will see hands-on practice and skills and setting intention for the future. After the webinar today, I'll be available to answer questions about Gravity or working with Gravity, or just stay and hang out and nerd out. I'm into this stuff. So please feel free. And here we go. Is everybody ready? Great. Let's start right here. We were talking about the research, and here's some that we can share right now. This comes from the Journal of Systems and Cybernetics, which is basically the way that we move through systems, and another study done at Kent State University that talks about how disengaged we are when we are online. You know that people are 40% less likely to engage overall? Interesting, isn't it? You know people who are willing to talk all the time, and those people are probably still willing to talk all the time. And then, of course, there are people who are hesitant as it is, and those people are 40% less likely to engage. Now, they are more likely to do some things. For example, text. 22% more likely to text, 44% more likely to email, 35% more likely to just goof off and do whatever, and 103% more likely to watch videos. Have you ever watched a video during a meeting or an online presentation? It's pretty interesting, isn't it? So I guess the question is this: why? In the chat, let's do a little bit in the chat. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people are so much less engaged when we're teaching online? Is it something about the format? Is it how they are? Can you say a little bit about that in the chat? You can take a guess at it or say a little bit from your experience. Why are people less engaged? Today, as we move forward, we'll reveal some of the research around that and what we can do to get that back as well. Too much text in online presentations. Oh, distractions are no jokes. It is easy to get caught up in other things, isn't it? And Jose points out, you don't get caught when you do it. That's something real, isn't it? We're all kind of like little kids like that in a little bit of a way, aren't we? And so as we move forward, what we're recognizing is that's real. And so if we as facilitators in either meetings or in workshops recognize that that's real, then we're going to have to do things to put it back. The skills that we're working on today are just that. What can we do to put those back? And let's start here. Let's start with quick tips. Everybody loves quick tips, right? Here's a big one. I know what's coming up because I've got a second monitor here, right? If you don't have a second monitor, the second monitor is the tool for being able to present well, for being able to not have to read bullet points to people. Don't you love it when folks just read you the bullet points? You know what I mean? Right. So if you have a second monitor, you can put your presentation, if you have one, on the other monitor, and you can read your notes and see what's coming up on this monitor. Right. By the way, you can get second monitors all day long for free off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or however you do. And the nice thing about them is generally you plug it into your laptop or into your computer and it works. Right. So if you're technically challenged, you don't have to worry about that too much. All right. So that's the first tip. Here's the second tip, and it's about the way we look, right? Because we all know that looks matter. Anybody who said that looks don't matter was probably talking to their kids, right? Because we all know that they do. What's most important about the looks on camera is about the lighting. It's front lighting, so we don't look like we're in the witness protection program. And if you want to really go at it, what you might consider doing is setting up two lights at about a 45-degree angle. You can see I've kind of got one here, you can see the shadow, and then one over here, you can see the shadow. Right. And so we're kind of building a little bit of that film look. Now, because I want to get all fancy, I also have a light projecting on the back of the wall there. So I get kind of like a cinematic effect. And either way, it's front lighting that's most important. Now, here's a neat one that you might not have heard of. This comes from a study published in the Journal of Business and Psychology. Business and Psychology. I bet those people are fun at parties. Right? It was published in 2009. And what they did was a meta-analytic where they were studying what makes meetings successful. What they were really studying is what makes meetings judged successful. Right? So when you come out of the meeting, you're like, that was a good meeting. Then they go, successful. And they tried to break it down with a bunch of different variables. There were variables in there about the facilitator, whether or not the facilitator engaged people. Do you know the number 3 most heavily ranked variable as to whether or not a meeting was judged successful is whether or not the meeting started on time? This was a little confronting for me because when I read it, you know how many of my meetings started on time? My classes, 0 of them. Every single one. I was saying, well, let's just wait a couple of minutes for the people who aren't here yet. And what's interesting, the people who are on-time people, you know who you are, right? About 20% of those people get low-key offended when we wait around for the people who haven't shown up. If that's you, can you give me a yes in the chat real quick? Do you get kind of low-key offended when you show up on time and they're like, let's just wait for a few minutes for everybody else who didn't do that? It's interesting, isn't it? I was speaking to a VP at CBS Interactive, was in one of my workshops, and she said, well, of course, David, if they show up late, that's on them. If you start late, that's on you. And I was like, whoa. Right. So if we're going to start with some quick tips, what we might do is make sure you have 2 monitors so you can have a cheat sheet, see what's coming up. You might make sure that you've got a couple of lamps so you look good, right? And just go ahead and start on time. You might start with a story or with some sort of engagement so that people don't miss important things. And what's interesting is the more you start on time, the more people start on time as well. Now, as we move forward today, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I will attend to the chat here and there. You won't interrupt me, and we can move through that as well. Good. So I think we buy it, right? That things are more difficult when we're connecting online, when we're teaching online, when we're meeting online. And so there's a really interesting study in the Journal of Computers and Human Behavior. These people totally nerd out about the way that computers and people interact. And they're having a field day nowadays, I bet you, right? And so what they did is they looked at the different factors inside online meetings and inside online teaching, trying to figure out which is the factor that most leads to what they call negative disinhibition, right? So what we're talking about is when you're disinhibited, you do whatever you want. And if that's negative, maybe that means multitasking. Maybe that means watching a video, right? Here, check it out. if you had to guess in the chat real quick, if you had to guess, what do you think is the number one contributor to people just doing whatever? Right? So maybe they're chatting or texting or watching a video. Maybe you're checking email right now. In the chat, any ideas? If you had to guess what number one is, what would you guess? We can kind of like play prices right here. Whew, Liza pops in pretty quickly with bored. Anonymous, yeah. I love the picture that we've got on the screen here right now. Lack of eye contact. We've got a winner. It's the camera, and specifically, it's a lack of eye contact. I mean, can any of you honestly say that you've ever been in a meeting or in an online class with the camera off and you weren't in email doing something else? I mean, it's kind of impossible, isn't it? There's something really weird about that camera being on that builds accountability and that builds engagement. Maybe it's just the idea that when we're with people, we see people. One of the things that we do in Gravity is get people to get the cameras on right away. Now, there are a couple of tips with this that you might consider. And if you like, you can write this down, and we'll also provide the recording after the workshop as well. Here are a couple of cool tips. If you call the workshop a video workshop or a video class, people are 20% more open to having their video on. So what we're talking about is about setting expectations, right? You might also consider building yourself a little speech in the beginning. The one that I like talks about the idea that the class is not really a class, it's a workshop, right? And the most human things about workshops are the humans, and the most human things about humans are getting the cameras on. It's seeing the humans, isn't it? And so I have a little why speech. In our influence workshops, we talk about the ideas that people are 68% more likely to be open to doing something if you include a why. And what's interesting is that the why doesn't really seem to matter. It's just a psychological trigger that allows people to say, okay, right? So if you give them a good why, that humans are humans, and then you say something like, so let's go ahead and get the cameras on. Take that opportunity to drink some water, hang out for a second. Now, of course, one of the things that we might be conscious of is that some people live with 4 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. So what we're not trying to say is to be really insistent or pushy about it. And if you're trying to get one thing, if you allow your attendees to not have their cameras on, what you're really doing is just asking them to disengage. Right. So all the rest of the things that we'll talk about today, it's weird. I mean, I didn't want to have my camera on when I first started this either. And then after a while, you get used to it, don't you? Okay, great. Here are a couple of camera tips. That study in the Journal of Computers and Human Behavior did break it all the way down into eye contact. And eye contact on camera means looking at the camera, doesn't it? Like here I am looking at the camera right now, and it kind of looks like I'm looking at you, doesn't it? Here I am looking down sort of at the PowerPoint, and we're very used to this. This is how people present online lots of times, right? So we kind of get it. It's just that getting it doesn't supplant millions of built-in years of evolution. You know, eye camera is such a big deal. Eye camera. Oh, I think I just coined a phrase, right? Now, the interesting thing about it is that when we're looking at the camera, we're not looking at the people. So it looks like we're looking at the people when we're not. Interesting, isn't it? One of the cool things about Zoom is you can move people around in Zoom. Did you know you can do that? Right. So for example, right now I can grab Mark Fong and move him up to the top. So he's right underneath my camera. And if Mark's talking right now, I'm looking at Mark's box anyway. And now I'm looking at the camera, and it's a very small difference. So you might consider something like that when we're looking at it. Here's another tip with the camera. And it comes from the world of professional therapists. Right? Professional therapists certainly want to make it look like they're listening, even if they're thinking about their grocery list in their head. And so one of the things that they teach therapists to do is to give the appearance of listening. And the appearance of listening looks like this. It's called the triple nod. It's a medium speed slow-ish, medium speed nod where you nod 3 times. If you can go, in your head when you're doing it, then you're doing it right. Let's go ahead and try it. Let's look right at the camera. I know it's kind of a little weird, and give that camera a triple nod. When your attendees are asking questions or speaking to you, it makes a big, big difference, doesn't it? Okay, so if the idea is that people do disengage online and that you're going to have to work harder to get them back, then your main job as a facilitator, your main job is to engage. If you're going to take one thing from this little workshop, it's engage way more than you would in person, because people are way less likely to engage. So you need to go and get them. A huge, huge part of any sort of teaching is sales, right? And sales, really, if you think about it, it's about engagement, isn't it? People choose to engage. What do you think? True or false? Do people choose to engage? Do you? Do you make up your mind, yeah, I'm into this one or not? Right? So you as a teacher can make a massive, massive difference by plugging into the cycle that human beings use to make decisions. Right? So what we're really doing is following the cycle that we all use to make decisions, and we're engaging people so that we can help them to decide to engage. This comes from a fascinating study that started at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. It was the marketing department and the psychology department got together talking about like, how do we market to people? And it turned the world of psychology sort of on its ear as they're figuring out how human beings make decisions. Here, check it out. Let's see if this connects with you. It turns out that almost all decisions we make to do something, to take action, it's not to get something good. It's to solve or avoid a problem. If you think about all the stuff you need to take care of in your life, almost all of it is to solve or avoid some sort of problem, isn't it? Right? I got to take care of this. I got to take care of that. I got to take care of that. I mean, there are people who just sit around doing puzzles because they're fun. Our brain loves figuring out problems. And so when we start a class with, hi, my name is David Lieberman, and today we're going to talk about this, and let's go through an agenda, blah, 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 you're already losing people. You're already losing people. Here's what's important. I'll pop it up on the screen. If you want to take notes, awesome. Always, always, always start with the problem that you're going to solve today. That's what'll hook people. You can either start with, okay, so next during our onboarding, we're going to talk about how to call in sick, or you can start with, sooner or later, you're going to wake up and you're not going to feel good, right? You're going to need to call in sick. And that's not the time to realize that you don't know how to call in sick and you're like combing through the corporate intranet and you're like, and you have to call in sick. I mean, that's not an option, right? Now I've got you, which is why we don't announce the topic first. We announce the topic second. The topic is the solution. Problem, solution, problem, solution. This is the way that all gravity topics come at us, right? So that's why we're going to talk about how to call in sick. That's why we're going to build effective project management. That's why we're going to learn how to engage people online, because people are 40% less likely to engage. Making sense? Now, real quick, they do have to know what you're talking about. And you've got about 8 to 10 seconds to explain what you're talking about, right? So if you say, next, we're going to talk about online disinhibition. So basically what that means is when we're disinhibited, we do whatever we want. And if it's negative, then we're not doing the best things in whatever we want. And when you learn how to do it, it'll be fantastic, fantastic. Human beings, when we make decisions, we think of a problem, we think of a solution. We're like, how would that work? Would it turn out good? And if it does, we're in it. So you as a facilitator can do the same thing. Here, let's try something real quick. Let's stop and think about something that you might teach. If you're like, oh, I didn't come prepared with homework, David, then we can instead think about something that you do at work that you might pass on. Here's the question for you. What problem is that something solving? In the chat, can you put a little bit about what problem that something solving? Right, so it might be a work problem. It might be an emotional problem. It's okay if the problem that we're solving is that something's frustrating. Neat, right? So what we're doing is we're grabbing onto these people. We're grabbing them. And here's the deal. Now that we've got them, now we get them experiencing. You know, here at Gravity, we are big into the science of learning. And so the most popular, biggest boost, biggest awesomeness that's happening in the world of learning science right now says that, hey, people don't really learn from a lecture so well. What we learn from is from experience, like in real life. In real life, when you're walking along doing something, you're not just listening to someone and having ahas. In real life, the way that it works is you have some sort of experience. That experience happens down here in your brain, in the sensory cortex. Some people, when they're walking along, can feel themselves in the back of their head. You know, they're experiencing life. Something happens, and you're like, and that's something then starts doing reflective in the reflective thinking in the integrative cortex. That's the area of your brain where you sort of mull something around. You know what we're talking about when you're like, and something's not really formed, but it's sort of there. It feels like it's in the lower middle part of your brain, doesn't it? Then we analyze and we think. That happens in the front integrative cortex or the prefrontal cortex. And then finally, we think of something to do and we're like, aha. And then we do something. And that happens in the motor cortex, which is near the top of our brain, right? So when we go through this experiential learning cycle, it turns out that learning is much stronger. About 47% is the average into whether or not someone actually does something with that learning later on. And so the best teaching, especially the best teaching online, follows this type of cycle. Now, you don't really need to nerd out about the brain science behind it. What is important is that the more parts of your brain that you use while you're learning, the better off that learning works. And really what that turns into is what they officially call active learning. 83% of people, according to a published study in the British Educational Research Journal, 83% say that this active learning increases their positive experience. And so when we're talking about active learning, whether or not you're following that cycle, what we're really talking about is having them do anything aside from listening. So that could be talking, that could be practicing or interacting or making plans or solving problems or playing or experimenting or working in groups, either one. Here's a question for you. In the chat real quick, which one of these do you think is most effective? Most effective. If you had to guess, there is an answer. I'll reveal it in a little bit. Meanwhile, Jose says, how do you make clients less scared of speaking in public? And that's a real thing. Speaking in public is the #1 stated anxiety riser. #1. The dentist is #2, and death is #3. Jose, there are a couple of quick little tips I can give you. And one of them is around smoothing out your voice. It's not that AM radio host, and it's not exactly not that either. Research shows that when we smooth out our voice, it smooths out our brain as well, reduces anxiety, and allows us to keep up with ourselves. So you might try that out. It's pretty neat. Right, so we've got a lot of playing, a couple of working in groups and interacting and that sort of business. Turns out, here's the answer. Ready? I feel like I'm the most beneficial. #1 is working together to solve problems in groups. In fact, working together to solve problems in groups is more impactful. It has a bigger impact on performance and on learning than your background, than socioeconomics. You know, I mean, we all understand that people who grow up wealthy have an easier time with this type of stuff. It's even a better predictor of past performance. And so when we do that here at Gravity, the way that we do is we bring up some sort of problem and then we talk about the problem. We reach out, we get people interested and engaged, we have them relate it to their life. Basically, what we're doing is making sure that that problem is really a problem. Then we say, okay, so here's a skill that you might associate with that. We learn those steps step by step, and we practice the heck out of them, and we jump ourselves into groups and solve problems. The way that works online with Zoom anyway is with breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are super fun, right? When you put people into a breakout room, what you're really doing is separating them out so that they can have small group discussions. Here are a couple of tips with those breakout rooms. First off, you can send yourself an invitation to a breakout room or an invitation to the Zoom meeting and then open it in an incognito browser, right? When you open it in an incognito browser, you can join your own meeting. So you can join your meeting 3 or 4 times so you can practice with the breakout rooms. In general, you can't do a breakout room for less than 4 or 5 minutes because people spend a couple of minutes just saying like, oh, how was your weekend? How are you doing? My name's David. I mean, we can't avoid that stuff, right? And we'll want to give people some really pretty clear instructions when they go in. So what we're talking about is, hey, here's the problem that you'll solve together. And you're going to have about 5, 6, 7 minutes. You as the facilitator might grab your handy phone and time it on your end because 7 minutes feels like an eternity while you're sitting here waiting. Make sure that they understand that one of the main things about the breakout rooms is that everybody gets a chance to talk, right? That's what inclusivity is all about. And if your people can be, builders of inclusivity, then they get a gold star and everybody feels good about it as well. Now, here's the thing. When in real life, when we solve problems or have some sort of experience and there's a pop, we don't just go, pop, and move on. We talk about it, don't we? Right. And so what you might do when you're sending people into a breakout room is set some sort of expectation about what will happen when people come back, that we'll share our experience or thoughts or insights or ideas. We're talking about 20 or 30 seconds, something along those lines. When they come back, you might consider reaching out to them by name and calling their names first, right? So it's not, can we hear a little bit from Jared? It's, Jared, I'm hoping to hear a little bit about your experience and what you guys came up with and what you liked. 30 seconds or so. Jared, do you see the way I did that? It was name, request with time, and then name again, right? So people get a little bit of time to sort of build into that. And that experience of building breakout rooms so that people can experience, that's experiential learning. The whole thing is that it's so much harder to engage online, that if you just leave it up to them like you're used to in a normal classroom, the only people who will participate are crickets. Crickets are amazing audience members, aren't they? So if you're going to get out there and get it, that means that we always, always, always engage first. And if we engage people, what we do is we engage people with problems. Everybody wants to solve their problems. Now they're listening. If you tell them how those problems will be solved and how amazing it is, now you've got them. Now you can teach. Humans are pretty good teachers. If you get them talking and experiencing like they do in real life and solving problems in groups and coming back and talking about it, that's master level stuff. That's people who come out of workshops saying, that workshop was amazing. That was better than live. And that connection where you're looking right at people over Zoom. Now you're there. Next level secrets. That's what we're looking at. A couple of little things. Hopefully y'all have enjoyed this here. A couple of interesting things about gravity learning. You can expect to receive a little survey. We are big into metrics, right? If you can't measure learning, then you can't ever say that learning is effective. And we figured out ways to do metrics all the way up to ROI. ROI is kind of the golden chalice or of learning. And we figured out ways to get to it, real ROI measurements. And we're really leveraging an opportunity to give back. So new clients get to choose a charity or a nonprofit of their choice. And then we'll go do a workshop for that nonprofit for free, which we think is awesome as well. So everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. The half an hour goes by pretty fast, doesn't it? If you want to hang out and ask questions, I will hang out with you. We can talk about how to work with gravity or just nerd out about learning. For Gravity Learning, my name's David Lieberman. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much.